John Slanina's blog is called I Will Shout Youngstown. As it says on the title page, it's dedicated to the city of Youngstown and those who strive to create it. The name of the blog comes from a Youngstown steelworker named John Barbero, from a documentary called Shout Youngstown. Here's the clip.
And I understand William Saroyan wrote a story that when the Armenians were haven't been quiet since they were shoved off into the sea in Turkey just at the beginning of World War I. And they've so every place an Armenian goes, he shouts Armenia. And I sort of, since that became sort of my role, that when I went to Cleveland, had to shout Youngstown. I remember going to a jobs conference for new steelworkers organizing, and there again, I decided I'd have to shout Youngstown. And I caught the Secretary of Labor Marshall on the Capitol steps, and I said to him, my job is here to shout Youngstown, And I sort of sense this is still our role. But we shouldn't let the country forget.
Slanina moved away from Youngstown in 2000, but always stayed connected. He just moved back earlier this year following a job. Slanina lives in the western end of Youngstown, which is more of the cul-de-sac 1950s and 60s suburban-style neighborhood. We're driving around, and he's talking about Youngstown.
So one of the components that I feel is, if you lived here and you've been here 30 days, you're as much of a person who has lived, you have as much ownership of this city as someone that has lived here for 50 years their entire life. I don't think you necessarily need these, bona fides to necessarily say, I've been here forever and thus I dictate what happens here. I mean, that's just nonsense. It doesn't matter if you're from another country. It doesn't matter if you're from another city. Economic changes will happen. There's flux. There's more people that are going to move in here. And so I think anyone has a say as equal as anyone else.
Youngstown, according to the last census, had 82,000 people living in it. This year's census numbers are expected to be somewhere between 65 and 70,000. Despite its population, Slanina says Youngstown does have a big city vibe.
We have a lot of that historical architecture. We have public transportation. We have historic neighborhoods. We don't have pro sports teams, but you can drive an hour to get to two of them. To Cleveland and Pittsburgh, we're smack in the middle of. So as I describe Youngstown, it's big enough that you can still be anonymous. It's small enough that if you want to get local and really talk to people and walk into bars and people know your name, you can have both of those lifestyles. If you need to hide, it's not Mayberry. But if you want to change this place within a short amount of time, you can do so.
Even though there are 31 distinct neighborhoods in Youngstown, it is commonly divided up into 4 sections: the north, south, east, and west sides.
I think if you were to split up the topography of the city 4 ways, which people here do, there's the north side, south side, east side, west side, which are broken up by 3 rivers, which define these property boundaries, more or less. The west side, as in its entirety, is like this.
By this, he means relatively low vacancy, higher housing values, and more stable neighborhoods.
A big part of it, actually, is because of the park, which is this huge urban park on scale of Central Park in New York City. Probably a lot of foot traffic today.
Today is April 1st. It's about 70 degrees, and the park is bustling with activity. There are little leaguers with their moms, guys putting on a par 3 golf course, and college kids playing beach volleyball. The rest of the city, however, faces challenges that the West won't necessarily see. And though the downtown and Youngstown State University's campus are vibrant areas, neighborhoods on the south side and east side and parts of the north end are struggling.
The east side, a lot of it is developed, but portions of it, the extremes, are a little bit rural. That has to do with annexation back in the day. The the south side and the north side are definitely more along the grid, so to speak. Close houses are very close, just trying to describe the topography. And that's where the big river didn't quite separate things back in the day, so it was easier to shift between neighborhoods. You know, I think a lot of people tend to think Youngstown is a very poor place, and from a per median household average out across the entire metro area, compared to other places, it may be relatively lower, but there was so much, just like Detroit, there was so much wealth here in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, that the infrastructure is just amazing.
Similar to Detroit, the infrastructure of Youngstown doesn't fit its population. Youngstown was expected to hit 250,000 people as a result of the steel boom. They peaked at 170,000 and have been losing population steadily since the 1970s. Youngstown, also like Detroit, tends to have a low barrier of entry. People can come in, Slanina says, with very little capital and start a brewery or open a community theater house. It's very open to anything. He calls it the frontier, but of course, with the frontier, there are also challenges.
You can have a great lifestyle here, but you know, there's a lot of failures on the frontier as well of not making ends meet. And so I think the story still has to be told as us as a community. Are the boats going to rise or are they going to fall? And that's going to be the real test, is going forward. You know, are a few people's lives going to improve, or are we really going to see an uprise for the entire community?
Celebrate